Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay, so there's been a mystery for a while now about how the boss actually moves around without being detected, and this episode actually finally confirms how he actually does that. So, yeah, of course, as he admits, King Crimson as we've discussed, King Crimson he uses to conceal his identity by hiding behind his own stand so that other stand users can actually see what he looks like. But that also implies that same technique doesn't actually work for non-stand users who can't actually see King Crimson. So this episode kind of confirms how that actually works. But yeah, this episode kind of just tells us how exactly it is that the boss is able to conceal his identity from non-stand users, and it is a bit of an interesting little twist in the narrative, and I do kind of like it. But in case this episode is actually starts with a flashback where we actually find out about the boss's birth. As we find out, the boss's mother, whose name isn't given in the anime, but the boss's mother is actually committed. As we find out, she was committed to for 10 years inside an all-women's prison, and miraculously and suddenly, without any warning, and almost seemingly out of nowhere, the woman suddenly winds up giving birth. Which winds up confusing a lot of the guards because they hear her letting out her blood-piercing scream in the middle of the night, and they go check on her to discover that she's pregnant and currently giving birth. With several of the other guards admitting that it shouldn't be possible for her to get pregnant because, again, all-woman prison. And as we find out, apparently she's been committed for at least 2 years and shown no signs of being pregnant, which has confused the guards to no end, as she's been serving 2 years of a 10-year sentence, and it's confused the hell out of everybody. And of course, the lead guard then proceeds to ask the woman where the father is, pointing out that obviously the father should be in the prison somewhere. But the woman merely admits that the father has been dead for at least 2 years, which only confuses the guards even more, because obviously if she had an extended pregnancy for about 2 years, that makes very little sense, and point out that that's very strange. But in case she does eventually give birth to a healthy baby boy with pink hair, and the little baby boy is unusual in that he isn't crying like at all to anybody in regards to the fact that he has just been born, and also his eyes are open pretty much the whole time, and of course the guards are immediately point out that they can't raise a baby in a prison. So of course they ask the woman where she was born and where she was raised, and the woman then proceeds to point them in the direction of Sardinia, which of course is revealed to be her hometown. Which also kind of explains some other stuff that I'll get into in a minute. But in case this boy is then sent to live with a local priest, and winds up growing up in Sardinia and Point Smerella, and we do eventually kind of see what he looks like. We'll kind of see what he looks like. He is he is kind of somewhat revealed, but more so later in the episode. And we actually do find out what his name is. But in case this kid grows up to be a young man in the area, and where we find out is his affinity for small creatures, and at one particular point he actually winds up protecting a frog from getting run over by a truck, which where we find out he's kind of established to be kind of the village idiot, but he's a very clumsy person, and some of the people even remarked that as well, pointing out that he shouldn't be walking in the middle of traffic trying to save frogs. But he does wind up ultimately saving a frog, which does wind up helping him protect them. And it's at this point where the man actually winds up meeting Donatella Una, who we have kind of somewhat met, but she is formally revealed in this episode in a flashback, and yeah, we do finally wind up meeting her, and of course she is indeed Trish's mother, but in any case, she immediately comes up to him and asks him if he is all right, and asks him if he likes frogs. And what we find out is that Mizuna has she very much likes she very much likes pretty things, but not so much ugly things or things that disgust her. And she also points out that he has a very kind soul, and that she would like to get him know him better. And she wonders if she would like to just hang out with her for a bit. And sure enough, he immediately agrees to that, and the two immediately hit it off and go out for some sparkling water. And of course, later that day, the man then asks his priest father, adopted father, I guess, but asks his adopted father if he would like to, if he could become a sailor, and of course the man immediately agrees, and the priest agrees to give the man his blessing and let him go on to become a sailor. And then later, when he's riding in his, I guess you could call it his carpool, because it is a car, but he's riding with other people. But as the priest's carpool is actually driving by, he actually notes that his adopted son is actually taking a picture with Donatella, and is actually snapping a picture of her, which winds up becoming the main focus of why he wants to go and try to eliminate, and why the boss wants to go and eliminate the group, because this man is heavily implied at the beginning to be the boss, and it does eventually get revealed how that works, but. In any case, the man is in case upon seeing that, and when several of his colleagues remarked that the man seemingly came to that little seaside port on foot, the priest then decides that it's probably a good idea to build a garage and get his son a car at long last. And sure enough, he immediately does that. He picks up a pick and hoe and he picks up a pickaxe and starts picking away at the floor to make a new space for a garage. And then he discovers something disturbing, which is that he eventually picks open the floor to discover a hand, which winds up disturbing him when he finally figures out what it is, and he becomes disturbed, pointing out that there seems to be a corpse underneath his living room. But then he decides to actually start excavating a little bit further, and what we find out is that it's actually the boy's mother. Apparently, she has been kept somewhat alive underneath the boards of the church house for about for a couple of years now. When the boy actually finds out that the priest had uncovered his secret, discovering that he had kept his own mother boarded up alive somehow, and also with her mouth stitched shut, but still very much alive. The boy immediately comes in and burns down the whole village. So and is reported as one of the men dead. Of course, there's several of the people are killed and several more disappear, and of course the boy's whereabouts are completely unknown. But then we actually find out in the modern day that he actually wound up surviving and has lived to adulthood. And this was 15 years prior. But this man whose name is Vinegar Doppio, he winds up becoming a very important figure in this part of the narrative, because that whole story was about him. Although as admitted, he doesn't seem like the kind of violent person who would burn the place down. So it does wind up becoming an interesting thing. But in any case, his story then proceeds to pick up exactly what we found out earlier, where once again he tries to save somebody from an oncoming truck. This time, a little boy hunting a bug. But the boy is very much aware that there's a truck coming and immediately runs out of the street. And Doppio is just barely able to save himself by catching a lamppost, but his briefcase gets completely trashed. And of course the man is very upset about Doppio is a little upset about the fact that his stuff got ran over, and the truck driver kind of yells at him a little bit. But as he's picking himself, and of course he also gets splashed with mud a little bit as well. But as he's kind of cleaning himself up and picking himself up a little bit, he's actually approached by a fortune teller in an alley who offers to read his fortune. Pointing out that he's actually taking a bit of a notice to Doppio, and is curious as to what kind of life he led. but of course, Doppio is very open about the fact that he doesn't want anybody actually, he really doesn't want to want his fortune read, but then the man insists to start reading his fortune anyway, pointing out that, by his own observation, he has noticed that Doppio seems to be somebody who used to live in Sardinia and is now coming back. And of course, Doppio just disregards that, pointing out that obviously that's a very obvious thing to point out, since obviously he has a briefcase with him. Obviously, he's coming in for a trip, and of course, it's at this point where the fortune teller continues, pointing out that he also notes that there seems to be he seems to be harboring some sort of secret. And proceeds to remark that he feels like there's a light and a darkness contained within him, and that they're both kind of differently, and that he takes advantage of the secret to kind of hide from other people. And Doppio then starts to become interested and is curious as to how exactly he could actually know all of this, but and sure enough goes up to him, and the man even offers to take his fortune for half of what he normally would, but of course, Doppio wonders how he works by scrying it, and also notes that he has a crystal ball and if he's scrying into it. But then the fortune teller merely remarks that he's already begun, and quickly reveals that the mud splash on his pants. He points out that he's learned in his many years as a fortune teller that sometimes the best way to actually look into a person's past and identity is by actually noting things that are coincidental. Case in point, the mud splash actually reveals that he's currently in Sardinia looking for his daughter. And points out that she likely is in Sardinia as well. But also notes that Doppio seems a bit too young to have a son, or rather of any sort of kid. Really just a son, daughter, anybody. He's too young. But of course the kid Doppio is also immediately confused as well, pointing out that obviously he doesn't have a kid and has no idea what the fortune teller is talking about. At which point the fortune teller, to confirm his theory, then insists on reading Doppio's palm, which Doppio admits that he doesn't want him to, but the man becomes increasingly insistent and starts trying to grab Doppio's palm, even offering to pay him. And eventually Doppio winds up flying off the handle and becoming increasingly upset. And this is where the reveal comes in. Eventually Doppio changes personalities entirely and proceeds to attack the fortune teller, and also becomes increasingly muscular, and his age, and he starts to get significantly older. And of course, this is what we find out is that apparently, and this is according to the story, apparently the boss and Vinegar Doppio are technically the same person, and it's revealed that Vinegar Doppio has dissociative identity disorder, and that the boss is the dominant personality in that. So it's implied that that implies that that's how he's been moving around without being detected. He hides inside Vinegar Doppio using his dissociative identity disorder, and then proceeds to just move around undetected, because who's going to suspect Doppio of being the crime lord of a major crime syndicate in Italy? Nobody's going to suspect somebody who as weak-willed as Doppio is, and that is kind of a cool reveal, and I do kind of like that. But in any case, the boss, now in complete control of Doppio's body, then proceeds to now in complete control of his mind. I should more specify. Then proceeds to tell the fortune teller that it is his job to actually look into people's pasts, and it's because he was so willing to look into things where he wasn't allowed to look into, that it ultimately wound up being his undoing. And the boss through Doppio then proceeds to tell the man that he will kill him quickly because of his service as a fortune teller. And then also proceeds to point out that maybe he could answer a couple of questions for him. And then proceeds to pull out a picture of Risotto Nero and asks him where Risotto is. Pointing out that he's a traitor and that he's looking into him, and he's wondering if he's going to encounter him at any point. And of course, the fortune teller immediately admits that he hasn't seen the man personally, and doesn't really know who he is or where he's currently at. But he does admit that, using his fortune telling, that that he likely is in Sardinia because he foresees the boss eventually encountering him at some point. And the boss then proceeds to let go of him and put him down. At which point, the fortune teller then proceeds to take this opportunity to actually read his fortune. And sure enough, as he confirms, it was indeed a light and dark thing and confirms the secret. And does indeed confirm that so long as he has the passion to take care of anybody who actually knows that secret, and also hide that secret, that he will effectively be invincible and live a very happy life. And then proceeds to point out how beautiful a palm it is before the boss uses King Crimson to kind of mess with him by ripping off his own arm and replacing it where his old hand was. And sure enough, the man doesn't fully understand that he's not reading the boss's palm anymore, but his own. And it takes him a couple minutes to realize that he's missing an arm. And then the boss proceeds to crush him to death with King Crimson. And of course, and the little boy from earlier, who Doppio personally saved, then sees all this and becomes increasingly scared of Doppio, because obviously he just saw somebody he thought was a good person murder somebody else, and of course he's very scared. He's very, very scared about what exactly is going on. But as the man approaches, it's revealed that now that the person who knew his identity has been eliminated, the boss has since relinquished control of Doppio, and Doppio is now back in control of himself. And sure enough, the boy can only watch in confusion as Doppio checks on the bug that the boy was chasing earlier, and is glad to see that it's all right. And then proceeds to get into a taxi and drive off, telling the cabbie to take him to Port Smerella. And of course he proceeds to drive off with the boy, being very visibly confused. But in any case, as they're driving, the man then proceeds. Doppio, now in the back seat of a taxi cab, then pulls out of his envelope with a picture on in it, the picture of Donatella Una at the sign that he took a picture of, and proceeds to put it back in the envelope, and then asks the cabbie if he can borrow his phone, since he admits that his own phone is apparently broken, and he needs to actually wind up call somebody. But the man is and of course the cabbie is very confused, but pointing out that he doesn't really have a phone. But then Doppio actually, I need to stop calling him the man, but Doppio then realizes that he's actually in the place he needs to be, and actually winds up getting out, and but then discovers to his horror that the man has actually jacked up the prices on his cabbie. And of course the man it's heavily implied that the man is trying to extort Doppio because he's a tourist, or at least he thinks he's a tourist, and is trying to kind of hassle him out of money, is trying to hassle him out of his money that he obviously thinks he brought on a trip. But and of course, having taken note of the envelope that Doppio had actually slipped in his pocket, then demands to see it, and of course the man immediately accosts Doppio and eventually takes the envelope from him and tries to open it. But of course, this is at this point where Doppio once again begins to fly off the handle and proceeds to attack the cabbie, and jabs his finger in his eye, and tells him that he wasn't supposed to see anything that was actually in the envelope. When suddenly Doppio starts hearing a phone ring, which is very odd because he openly admits that his phone should be broken, and wonders if there's a phone nearby, and actually stops his assault on the cabbie to go look for it. And what we find out is he's actually making the ringing sounds with his mouth. And of course, there's actually not really a phone ringing, but Doppio doesn't really understand that, and of course it's kind of implied that he's kind of a little bit crazy in this regard. But he then proceeds to take note of the little keychain that's hanging on the cabbie's dashboard, off the cabbie's rearview mirror, and proceeds to pluck it up and talk into it as if it's a phone, and that winds up freaking the cabbie out a little bit. And of course, what we find out is that this is actually how the boss and Doppio communicate. This is how the two personalities actually interact with each other, and it's kind of cool. But he then proceeds to the boss then proceeds to tell Doppio that to kind of call off his assault and stop attacking the man. Because as the boss points out, the cabbie apparently is no threat to them, because even though Doppio could have sworn that the man had seen the picture he wasn't supposed to see, while he's actually talking with Doppio, while the boss and Doppio are actually communicating with one another on the phone. The cabbie then proceeds to throw out Doppio's luggage and drive off and not charge him for anything, because obviously this whole situation has been a little too weird for him, and he decided it was not his business, so he just leaves, and it's great. But in case Doppio then proceeds to ask the boss what he's supposed to do now, since obviously he wasn't supposed to attack the cabbie. And of course the boss then proceeds to ask him if he's in the right location, and sure enough, Doppio points out that he is. He's actually watching the cabin where he's supposed to be, and where Team Bucciardi is eventually going to show up. But the boss also points out that he also needs to watch his back as well, because he's not the one watching people; he's the one being watched. And sure enough, what we found out is that Risotto has actually followed the quote unquote boss to his location. Having been in the same city and having actually watched some news footage to actually figure out figure out about the accident regarding the plane crash and the Notorious Big and a couple of other things that he's noted, but. Yeah, for those reasons, he actually wind up showing up in Sardinia and is actually trying to stake out Doppio. And Doppio asks him what he should do, but he then proceeds to point out that he needs to get close to Risotto to actually fight him, and that once he does, he'll actually take over, since, as he points out, if he gets too close, he won't be able to conceal his identity, and if Risotto actually finds out his identity, then all will be lost. But Doppio immediately agrees to that, pointing out that they'll immediately be able to fight back against him, and then proceeds to hang up. But then also immediately forgets what the order actually was. It's kind of revealed that Doppio kind of isn't aware of when the boss kind of takes over and communicates with him. But he does try to piece everything together, wondering what exactly it is he's doing, and proceeding to actually go down and actually try and figure out and to try and go and find what exactly is going on. He then proceeds to scoop up his envelope as well as all of his stuff. When suddenly as he's trying to work out what exactly it is he's supposed to do, Risotto suddenly appears and just kind of spooks him a little bit. And sure enough, Doppio just kind of trips over his own feet and winds up hitting a nearby rock and just bleeding out all over himself, which causes him to actually panic a little bit. And of course, Risotto then proceeds to wonder who this man is and what he's doing in Sardinia, pointing out that he seems like a very strange individual. But Doppio then proceeds to insist that he doesn't know what Risotto is talking about, and also proceeds to insist that he actually has no money, and tells him not to hurt him. Which of course causes Risotto to kind of rethink what he's thinking, pointing out that obviously he thought this man was somebody who worked in Passion, but admits that it doesn't seem like that's the case anymore, since obviously this man is very cowardly and doesn't seem like the kind of person who would join a gang, let alone someone as ruthless as Passion. So with that, he then proceeds to actually slowly walk up and pick up his knife, which he uses to kind of spook Doppio earlier. And this causes Doppio to panic a little bit, and it's at this point where Risotto then proceeds to pick up his knife, but then of course as he gets closer, then the boss kind of tries to take over when he's within 2 meters of Doppio. And of course, this is at this point where he also then proceeds to note it's at this point where Risotto points out that he actually did notice something odd about who actually attacked him, pointing out that he noticed that the man went to great lengths to actually conceal an envelope underneath his foot. and points out that while he doesn't believe that his innocence is actually an act, he also notes that there's probably something important in that envelope. So he approaches them. So after picking up his knife, he then proceeds to approach the man and asks him what exactly it is that's going on. What exactly it is that's going on with him, and asks to see what's inside the envelope. And of course, Doppio starts panicking and eventually does wind up picking up his foot to show Risotto what exactly was in the envelope. And what it's discovered is that there's nothing in the envelope. As it turns out, Doppio just kind of scooped out the picture with his foot and it wound up getting stuck to his foot without him realizing it. But and of course, after seeing the envelope, he then proceeds to actually note that there must be nothing strange going on. But he also at least with the envelope, because as he does point out that he did notice something that Doppio had a very interesting reaction right now, and then proceeds to point out that Doppio seems to be reacting to a noise that he shouldn't be reacting to, and does conclude that he is indeed a stand user, pointing out that Team Bucciardi has actually arrived, and what he's actually hearing is actually Aerosmith, which of course Doppio is then very confused by, and of course Risotto reveals that since is a stand, and only stands can see and hear it. Points out that Doppio must indeed be a stand user, and concludes that he'll have to actually fight him if he wants to get more information out of him. And of course, this is this point where Doppio realizing that Risotto has since somewhat figured out what's going on with him, then proceeds to try and attack him and try and close the distance between them, which Risotto immediately points out he has no idea what's going on. Immediately realizes that he must be a close range power type if he's trying to close the distance between the two of them and try to punch him. And it's of course it's at that point where he then reveals that if that is indeed the case, then he knows the exact way to actually deal with him. And of course, it's at this point where Doppio actually stops, doubles over, and starts vomiting out razor blades, which winds up confusing him. And but of course, Doppio, completely undeterred about the fact that he's not vomiting up razor blades, then proceeds to scoop some of them up and tries to attack Risotto with them. But Risotto once again reiterates that he knows exactly how he's supposed to deal with Doppio, and this time Doppio actually winds up vomiting up needles, which were sewing needles, I should mention, very very obviously big sewing needles, which just kind of fall out of Risotto's mouth, and of course this causes Risotto to kind of panic a little bit, and of course, this actually causes Doppio, I should mention, not Risotto, but this causes Doppio to actually kind of panic a little bit, and since he has no idea what kind of stand Risotto has or how his powers work, and of course, and this is this point where Risotto actually winds up leaping over the edge of the. He actually winds up leaping over the edge of the outcropping to leave, because to actually try to escape, since he thinks he has a very good idea of who this person actually is now, and then proceeds to leave. Or at least tries to bait Doppio into a trap, I guess. But and it's at this point where he actually winds up hearing another quote-unquote phone. This time it's actually a frog, because that's been an established pattern that he actually picks up phones that actually aren't phones. And sure enough, he then proceeds to actually scoop it up and tries to listen to it as if it's a phone, thinking that it's a quote-unquote payphone. And of course, he then proceeds to pick it up and starts conversing with the boss, with the boss then pointing out that he needs to follow Risotto, pointing out that Risotto obviously is going to eventually figure out his identity, and if that happens, then they're going to lose. But of course, it's at this point where Doppio actually wants to bring up his concerns about how he doesn't know what Risotto's stand is, nor how it works, and he's very concerned about the fact that he's not going to be able to fight back against him. But points out that he won't be able to get in range if the man is just going to be able to attack him by seemingly by spawning metal objects out of his body, seemingly out of nowhere. And we've established this. Risotto's ability seems to be a metal-based thing, so that's going to be interesting to figure out. But of course, that it's at this point where the boss actually insists that Doppio has everything he needs, and then proceeds to point out that proceeds to point out to Doppio that he has indeed provided him with some of King Crimson's power, and that he should use it to actually fight back against Risotto. And as he's saying that, the little face that appears on King Crimson's design. It actually winds up appearing on Doppio's forehead, and as the boss is actually demonstrating his abilities, and that's kind of interesting. And that is kind of interesting. That is a very interesting way to manifest your stand. But in case this episode, I should mention, this episode has actually brought up a couple of interesting things regarding the boss and how he actually hides in plain sight. As it turned, the big reveal is that he apparently has been hiding in plain sight for a long time, and apparently after his miraculous rebirth, he then proceeded to kidnap his mother and hide her in the house that he grew up in, which is actually a lot disturbing, I should mention. But this episode seems to suggest that not only does the boss kind of pilot Doppio's body remotely and through his dissociative identity disorder, every time he thinks there's a conflict that's going to cause problems for him, he will just turn it on, which is interesting. But this does kind of confirm how the boss has been able to move around. He has dissociative identity disorder. He hides inside of Doppio when he doesn't need to make himself known to the public. And of course, Doppio just kind of goes about his business because other than taking orders from the boss via quote unquote phones that the boss just kind of contacts him through, Doppio mostly is an unassuming individual that nobody would suspect to be the leader of a major crime syndicate. And of course, this wind up working in the boss' favor because for the most part, nobody has since figured out how he actually moves around. So of course, anybody who tries to figure out how his King Crimson works and tries to figure out what his identity is, does quickly find themselves at a roadblock because not only if you're a normal civilian, obviously you're not going to figure out that Doppio and the boss are the same person, and unless you're a fortune teller, which rip that guy. But even on the off chance that you do figure it out, that's when the boss actually winds up taking over and winds up killing you with King Crimson, which, as we've established, is kind of hard to beat in the first place because it's able to just erase time and create situations where nobody can actually read its movements. So very difficult to actually fight back against a stand like that. And in addition to that, he just kind of hides, so it's very unassuming. In addition to that, which I do find kind of interesting. But yeah, in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks down on my way saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!